I look okay. Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever part of the world you're in. This is Carla from MindPlore with Carla and Friends. And for some reason, Tuesdays go a little crazy, and I have some big issues with Facebook and StreamYard and getting everything started. I don't know why, but I'm here now. And you know what we're talking about today? I'm actually very excited to have these two here with me. We were supposed to have two others, but they kind of had some issues come up and they couldn't be here, Neville and Asma. But that's perfectly fine too. I have a question that I'm asking everyone. I have my own thoughts on it, and I'll talk about them a little later. Do we create our world by our thoughts, or does our world create our thoughts? Now, I'm not sure how you guys think about it. I know what I think and how I have been growing and learning recently. So I want to kick this off with Mary Ellis. Tell me, does the world create our thoughts, or do we create the thoughts? And Mary Ellis, I am muting myself. And
hello, everybody. I'm Mary Ellis, and I am a story activist. So I approach the world through a lens of story, or rather realizing that humans approach the world through a lens of story. And that colors what we think about it and how we perceive it and how we can be in it, actually. Our stories create our capacity for impact and our agency, whether we feel like we can have agency and impact, and whether we feel like we're allowed to have impact, and all of those kind of things. And, when you first asked about, do thoughts create us, or do we create thoughts? And I was kind of thinking back to what meditation practitioners say, which is, you are not your thoughts. They tend to be a stream of stuff going on, and it's easy to get caught up in the swirl, almost like you're a leaf going down the river, spinning on whatever is happening. And I've noticed that for myself a lot during the pandemic, because I've been at home alone since January the 29th, 2020. And I've realized really it's not anybody else's thoughts spinning around my head, it's my own. And yet I felt myself greatly influenced by the thought stream I'm part of. So in a society where people are afraid of something, or are concerned about something, or focusing on something, it's easy to get caught up in the swirl. So I think back to Winston Churchill, who famously said, first we create our structures, and then our structures create us. So I think of us human beings as part of the biological nature of life, and then we've created these square buildings that we live in, which is probably not a natural shape. And a lot of our decision making comes out of this square shape. I was born in the States, but I spent almost 30 years of my life in New Zealand, and these are two geographically quite different landmasses. So where I grew up in the United States, in the middle of the country, I don't know where you are from, Knut, but I'm taking from your name, you're a Scandinavian. I also spent 2 years living in Denmark. So I know that these geographies shape how we perceive the world too, where we think we're going. If you live at the edge of the ocean, it's a very different thing than growing up in the Midwest in the United States, where there's just land as far as you can see. Or the difference between Denmark, which is a very small country and protruding out into the ocean, and Sweden, which is a very large country and very long. These geographies also help to shape our worldview. So I'm interested in our inquiry into this together, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Knut, and where we might go in that conversation. Let me pass the mic to you.
Yeah, I like what you say. It's and Carla, I would say yes, as a beginning, that yes, our thoughts, our consciousness is creating the world. And I know that more and more scientists, they are at least exploring these questions, between what is visible and what is invisible. What is, and that is even a biblical phrase. It said, remember that everything is created in the invisible. So it starts with our thoughts. It starts, and what you talk about, Mary, is of course not this. It's like a stream of consciousness, and consciousness then creating us gives us, so to say, something to work on. The consciousness, the open consciousness beyond time and space. And this is also part of what we're discussing. That when we, as I said, we are in this true, pure consciousness, then we are beyond time and space. And some scientists say that we create time and space from consciousness. So time and space is the effect of consciousness as the cause. And, in spiritual practices, of course, this is, how one looks at it. But the problem has been that the spiritual traditions, they have abandoned and denied the science. So somehow we are in the midst now of a discussion, or the discourse, where we discuss and we try to combine and to unite those two perspectives into one holistic, more integrated understanding and cosmology. So for me, is that because when I work creativity, this is experienced in a very practical way. I really feel when I am in my stillness, it's like I open up for a consciousness and I download something. So I'm given thoughts. I am not thinking. It's like something, whatsoever that is, this consciousness, this open space is giving me a thought. And then I start to reflect on that thought. So when we go back again to the more simple things here, it's about the thoughts and the feelings. And when the thoughts and feelings are coming together, something happens in our perception. So it depends on how do I think and how do I feel about how I think, and vice versa. So that's why we can have different perspectives and opinions of reality. Because we combine our thinking and our feelings, and as you said, even our background and culture affects us, in this issue. So yes, for me, it's more and more interesting, at least, really to explore this quantum, where we are beyond time and space in this open consciousness, and that when we are open for the consciousness, we are given thoughts as raw material. And then we start to implement that in reality, as reality.
You remind. Oops, sorry, Carla.
Go. Mary Ellis, continue.
You reminded me, Knut. You reminded me, Knut, of the kind of the idea of entanglement and how we're part of the same thing. And that made me think of a story that the author Liz Gilbert was telling one time. So she wrote Eat, Pray, Love. That's one of her most famous books. She's thought a lot about a lot of different things. And she said she had an idea for a book in mind that she was working on, and it had a particular protagonist set in a particular space and a polar expedition and, this kind of stuff. And she had worked on this novel for a while. And she ran into this other woman, she literally bumped into her. She said their heads bumped. And she had this sense of her thoughts passing from herself to this other person. And after a while, she kind of realized maybe this book isn't mine to write. And this other woman wrote the book that she had been thinking of. There were some things that were different, but the core of it, the shape of it was the same. And she said, as she was telling this, that she really felt like this idea needed to come into expression, and that it leapt from her head into the head of this other woman, and that she was fine with that. It's almost like she said, we've been mothers together, and this kind of popped out as the expression. So I've often thought to myself that whatever wants to come into this world, it's not a surprise that more than one person thinks of something at the same time, because a creator energy would not be so silly as to leave a great idea only in one mind. So it's not only Charles Darwin who is thinking about how species evolve, someone else was on the case too, and he had to rush to get published in order to be the first on the spot. But it's interesting to me that people think of things at the same time, because it's almost like the unmanifested field, that field Rumi talks about, beyond the right doing and wrongdoing, that I'll meet you in that field. There is a field of all possibilities. And maybe the work of a great human being is to become the most joyful co-creator as possible with the field of possibility and with all the other human beings, who are simply manifestations of that same field of possibility. So there's something about the quantum field that I like very much, and that I love watching in movies too, as people are exploring that. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And I'm trying to think of the name of the movie with Matthew McConaughey in it, where he gets stuck in the black hole and he's in the field, pushing the books out to give his daughter the ideas she needs to move the human beings forward.
I never saw that movie, but as you were talking, I thought of Groundhog's Day, where Tom Hanks, I really love Tom Hanks, but Tom Hanks goes over and over the same story, and it keeps on improving each time he does it, because he realizes that he needs to change, and by his self-change, the whole story changes and the day can progress. Otherwise, it stays back in that negative mode. And I know for me, like today with Facebook and StreamYard and YouTube. And by the way, people, we are on YouTube today only because we could not get onto Facebook Live. So if you want to watch the show, please, you may want to click on the YouTube channel and subscribe to our page, because this may be what's going on for the next few weeks. Who knows? I just didn't want to take the show off air again for a few months. But back to this whole thing, this is it. We can either decide to stay where we are and how we have lived our life, or we can shift it and make changes. And when we make changes, we're creating our own world. We create our world even without the changes. It's how we think. In my mind, it's how we think that creates our world. So if we think we cannot do something, right, we're never going to do it. But think of the person who thought of the first cell phone. No one else had that idea. This person created that cell phone. And look at it now, we have these wonderful smartphones. But did anyone dream of it? One person had that dream. Think about YouTube. It never existed before. And someone decided, hey, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a YouTube channel on the internet? Millions of people watch it every day, and there are tons of shows on it now. But it came from a thought of one person. So do we shape our world, or does the world shape us? If we want peace in the world, where does that peace begin? Something to be thought about. What do you think, Knut? We'll go back to you, Mary.
Yeah, there are several aspects of this, of course. First, back again to you, Mary Ellis. That you talk about, when we talk about thoughts, you always put thoughts into a narrative, into a story. And then we tell ourselves that story, and that story becomes reality. So this is also about our belief and value belief system. So I think the worldview you mentioned, what we think on the deepest level, that will also then create the reality we perceive. And we know already that even if we live in the same community, in the same family, we can perceive it very, very differently because we have different perspectives from the beginning. So when you talked about also this, this um, that we receive something, because I'm back again to this consciousness. I'm totally fascinated by the thought that maybe we are these eternal beings. Daniel Bohm talked about the infinite potential, that we have, if there is infinite potential, we have unlimited resources. And it's like, as you say, that we connect with also what Jung talked about, this unconscious, the collective consciousness. We tap into something. So when you mention that maybe you shouldn't write this book because some other, but we have the same thought in the beginning. But this is not my task, and I have experienced the same. Because I work with this next Renaissance and what I've seen. So first of all, I really tell everyone that when I talk about the next global Renaissance, this is not my vision. This is not my project. I was given the vision. That is the difference for me. And then another, because then more and more people are talking about this. This is a practical level. This is one of my a Dutch futurist in my advisory board. He told me, "Do you know what the name of my next book is?" And so I said, "No, this is the New Renaissance." And I thought immediately that was the book I intended to write because I'm working with this all the time. But I think this is so important. That when we talk about the thinking, it's also that we are connecting with other people, kindred people, with spirits. They are thinking almost the same, but we have different perspectives and different tasks and different missions even in that collective task. This is not just about the individuals, but because we are entangled, then we have different perspectives. So when I talk about the New Renaissance, then other will write a book about it, and I create an ecosystem, and then you have other people say, yeah, but this is also my vision. I want to participate. And that is what I experience every day now. People come more and more into the same sphere. So then somehow that narrative, we have the same initial thinking, and from the initial thinking, it starts to create a new reality for me, but also for other people. And then we start to exchange, and then we deepen it more and more and create even a collective societal field. And that is what I see is happening all over the world now. It's a global movement. It's an evolutionary impulse coming from this consciousness, overall consciousness.
And if we all could connect, think of what would happen, the beauty of the world, instead of thinking we're separate, realizing that we are all connected and on the ship, as Captain Future Michael Cillian would say, we're all on the spaceship. Why don't we act like it and work together? Mary Ellis?
That's a good question. My heart has asked that a lot too. And I remember asking a friend of mine who was not only a neuro, she's a psychologist, a neuroaffective psychologist. So this is about how people connect, especially when they're younger, but also a 30-year meditator. And I said to her, why is it that when disaster happens for a short window of time, most people become the best of themselves? There's some who don't, but there are so many people are the best of themselves. They go and they look for other people. I was in New Zealand when the earthquake happened in Christchurch. And the people who were working on the earthquake, they were beautiful to behold because they would come on every night and they say, we will not rest until we have found everyone who is alive. It was like a burning torch. It was kind of incandescent, the clarity and the beauty of this divine masculine, really, mostly guys who were working and trying to save people. And so there's this window when we're like that. And I said to her, why can't we hold on to that? And she said, you have to remember that human beings are mammals and we are herd animals. And we operate quite like other herd animals. When there's plenty, we spread out on the plain and everything's spacious. When a threat comes, we bunch up and we put those most vulnerable in the middle and we turn to face the threat together. And so when the threat comes, we make that distinction between us and them. There's a split second when that happens in the brain. And I remember a brain researcher saying, if anybody would give me $1 million, that's what I would investigate. What is that moment when we have to decide between them and us? And what's in us and what's in them? Anyway, my friend said to me, we tend to operate around threat a lot, and it's only when we realize that the threat we face is unconsciousness itself that things will change. And I've never forgotten her saying that, because there's something really interesting about it. And it reminded me of a story. There's quite an old popular story of a old man sitting by the side of the road, sitting there very contemplatively, just relaxing, enjoying the air. And a traveler comes along, and the traveler says to him, "How are the people in the next town?" And the old man looks at the traveler and says, "How were they in the town where you came from?" The traveler says, "Oh, they were terrible. People complained about each other. They gossiped. They took advantage of each other. It was terrible." And then the old man looks at him astutely and says, "I'm sorry, you'll probably find them the same way in this town that's coming up." So sometime later in the afternoon, a second traveler came by and asked the man the same question. "What are the people like in the town that I'm traveling towards?" And the old man asked him the same question. "How were they in the town you came from?" And the man who was traveling said, "Oh, they were wonderful. I found it so hospitable. They were such good neighbors. I loved being there, and I was really sad to leave." And the old man says, "Well, you're in luck. The people in the next village are the same." So, there's something about the perception that we're carrying with us. And Knut, you mentioned stories there, and I think they're the frame. They are the frame of what we can see or not. And so, I call myself a story activist because I want to claim back that word activist, because to me, an activist is someone who activates something. So I'm hearing in you, Knut, that you're wanting to activate this global renaissance. That's the story you're wanting to bring to life, that you want to pay attention to. And Carla, the connection and people thinking about new things as they listen in on broadcasts and your other work. So what is it we choose to activate? What do we pay attention to? And that question to help me focus my own thoughts, what is mine to do? If I see the rubbish, is it mine to pick up? Can I listen deeply enough to hear what my soul is asking for? What is my soul reminding me that I have the unique capacity to do, or to activate, or to be, or to encourage in other people because of what I've seen before? So there's something wonderful about how we can use our own thoughts to see the best in other people and activate something in them as well, to call them forward in their own thoughts.
Knut, did you want to respond to that before I say anything?
Yeah, just to confirm what Mary Alice says, that I think this inner reality, and the more I work with this, because of course when we talk about this new renaissance and new awakening, I know very well that we need to transform the inner climate. We talk a lot about the outer climate these days. I think that is because, partially at least, because we are so concerned about the physical well-being. So we forget that we create the physical well-being from our inner climate. So the more we work on the inner climate, then we also will change our perception of reality. And if we don't like the reality, because that is also part of it, we should not accept all kinds of reality and perceptions. That is a part of the revival. That is a part of the change and the shift. That we stop to think that, okay, this is not on my table. This is not my, concern. So we take part because we are intertwined somehow. And then to envision a reality that is for the common good. For me, that is at the core. That's why I call it the collective individualist. That is the new Renaissance being, the collective individualist. It means that we do understand and we take into the whole this overall consciousness that everything is open, we are all entangled and intertwined and then dependent on each other. And then we also find our own uniqueness, because that is the paradox, but also the solution, that before we find our own passion and purpose as unique creators, we cannot become complete co-creators. It's not important. It's not possible, because otherwise we just adapt to the collective, to the consciousness that's already exists. So we need to find our own passion and purpose in the bigger context. And this is above the ego, but it's also using the ego for the best of the whole.
Say that last line again, Knut. It's also using the ego for
the common good, for the best for whole. Because if we don't have that ego power, and that is often, this masculine say, okay, yes, we will do it, we will fix it, yes, we will save them, whatsoever it is, but it's very, very fixed. And then that's why I mentioned that many times, but this feminine and masculine powers completing each other, fixed and flexible. The fixed is the masculine, yes, and the feminist is but how do we get there? Much more flexible, mobile, open, being in the open space together. That's why we need each other.
I was thinking about what you said about the climate. I went to the COP15 when it was in Copenhagen, and we had a little learning village. It was quite fascinating. We decided we would, some of us who are practitioners of the art of hosting, that is, how do you host and harvest conversations that matter? And we gathered at somebody's apartment or flat in the mornings to check in with each other. And then we would go to our different things that we were doing around the COP15. And there were many actions and activities happening. And then we would come back together in the evening and debrief with each other. And we decided we were like an oasis, and we could bring other people back with us if we decided they would fit in and they needed nurturing in the great storm that was going on out there. But one of the people in that learning village had actually written a book on inner climate change. And it really made me think of, okay, if everything is as above, so below, if everything's a mirror, then where are my polar ice caps melting? Where is it too hot in my system? Where have I not nurtured the permaculture? If permaculture says the boundary needs to be as diverse as possible in order to be healthy, where have I become like a one-crop system? Where have I not looked at myself as an ecology, and that realizing that for ecologies to be healthy, they help one another because they border one another. It's not an exclusive. You can't kind of close, if any cell closed its boundaries, it would soon die because the waste wouldn't be able to leave. So there has to be some kind of permeable boundary. And how do we do that? So I was recently in talking about story activism with a group, and I had a woman there say, stories are both productive and problematic. I think you could say the same thing for thoughts. They can be an enclosure or they could be an encounter. That's so interesting. And the question is, how do you hold the boundaries? So the word conversation actually implies almost like being the two banks of the river and having something flowing in between you, realizing that the banks of the river influence the river and the river influences the banks of the river too. They're connected. They're not separate. So it's not like, David Bohm, I said one time in conversation, that discussion is like percussion. We take our quantums and beat upon each other until one of us falls into submission, which sounds so horrible. That's not what conversation is about. If you decide you want to be in conversation, you're stepping into the idea that you may be changed. And I think good conversation, good exchanging of thoughts does that. It changes us. And that's actually a beautiful thing. Can we come to each other with the openness of inquiry, with thoughts that might be flexible instead of rigid, not my idea, my way or the highway? Actually, somebody asked me, in your spiritual life, have you learned anything? And I said, yes. If anybody says it's my way or the highway, run the other way. So, can we use our thoughts to benefit life? And maybe that's a good question. Does this thought benefit life? Is it serving life? Does it serve us? Or as Native Americans would say, does it grow corn for the people?
We have thoughts, Mary Ellis, that go through our mind like a stream, as a river, and they change from moment to moment. And it seems to me that as they're going through, we pick our thoughts. And I have a question for you about that. Someone once said to me that if we were given 10 comments to us, and 9 of them were positive, and there was one negative thought, what do we hang on to? And I think tell me what you think. It seems to me that we hang on to the negative instead of the positive. And how can we work to switch that? Because really it's the positive that helps us go forward. And I'd like an answer from both of you, but I'd like Mary Alice to start since she is.
I have a multitude of thoughts as you were saying that. So yeah, I grab onto the negative, and I'm assuming that's because my culture has told me I must continually better myself. And there's a violence to that, actually. There's a violence to the self-help industry. You're never good enough. So I think we have a plague of unworthiness on this planet at the moment, and that causes us to do a lot of weird stuff. And sometimes in social media to be abusive of each other. I think often people are reacting to things that they don't want to see in themselves. Like Jung talks about the shadow. We want to put the shadow outside onto somebody else because we don't want to hold it. There's something painful about realizing I'm not perfect, or I don't know what I'm doing, or I've hurt or pained somebody else. And if you get enough of that, somebody who is an extrovert will try to put pain out onto somebody else to try to get it out of their own system, and an introvert will turn it on themselves. And the far end of that is suicide, to try to get rid of the pain by getting rid of needing to deal with it at all. So there's a challenge of where that thought loop continually goes, and there's something about loops being programmed in the mind too. So there's something about working on that continually to move past that. I'd say we learn from the positive, but we also learn from making mistakes. No child would be walking if they didn't learn how to fall a lot, because that's what kids do, right? But parents don't say, you're never going to make it. They go, come on, you can make it. I know you go. Oh, yeah, look, first step. I often remind my niece, I was there in the first week of her birth, and I remember her mother opening her diaper and saying to my mother, her grandmother, Mom, look what she's done. And I remind my niece, who is now almost 30, every so often, I say to her, there was a moment in time where your mother thought everything you did was fantastic. And I just want to remind you that was so. So there's a lot of cultural impact on how we think about things and how we treat each other and the thoughts that come first. And it is, I think, a call at this point in time on the planet to become vigilant. What am I entertaining? It's like being in the Mad Hatter Tea Party from Alice in Wonderland, like what thoughts am I entertaining? And am I in fact stuck at this tea party with these thoughts that are not helpful? How do I move out of that? How do I say, okay, that was just a thought. Let me put that over here. Let me entertain a better thought for myself. And to look at what thought field am I part of? Who's helping to influence my thoughts? And they always say that you are a reflection of the 5 people you hang out with the most. So that's actually an interesting question. How is this thought field around me impacting me? And what do I choose to activate?
And I agree, because I know that if someone just tells me how wonderful I am and they put a but there, what becomes the next thought? Oh, I'm not good enough. And I am learning to take the but out of my thinking in order to begin to see, oh, I am really good, and so are you. And take the but out, because it really doesn't matter what I think of you. What matters is what I think of myself and what you think of yourself. Knut, do you have any thoughts on this?
Many. But when we talk about this 1/10, we learned this also in media when I studied media, that negative news are more interesting for people than the positive news, and we see that in the media. But this is also related to a topic that is a favorite of mine, of course, and that is about education. How do we treat our children? How do we treat the youngsters? What do we tell each other? And of course, when 9/10 of what we tell each other from the childhood is negative, then that is a part of a narrative, and it's an automatic. It is like this infrastructure of our thinking that we are not aware of. I call it the cultural taken for granted. We don't question it. So we think that this is reality. This is my life. 9/10 is negative, and one thing is positive. And when it's just one positive thing, how can I think about that? Because there is so overwhelming all the other things. So we start to avoid the negative, and that is the paradox. Even if it's 9/10, we don't really want to go into it. And you mentioned the shadow work and Jung, and I have learned more and more that, okay, in that shadow, there is not just the uncomfortable and, the demons, so to say. The angels, the treasures are hiding in the shadow. And when we start to understand that, and we start to tell a new story, we start to reveal some truths we have told ourselves and the environment, and we reprogram. And reprogramming is a part of this new awakening, for sure. So we start to understand that, okay, we learn also from the negative, and Joseph Campbell and his future, and I call it the future hero and heroine's journey. What is that about? That is to, again, be courageous enough to investigate and to explore both my individual shadow and not be afraid of it, to accept it, but also the collective shadows, because everything is interconnected. We have to understand that the culture and the upbringing, the educational systems, the social codes, they have implemented in us something that we need to question. And that is always a part of a revival or a big shift. We start to question things. And back again to what we started with, the thinking, creating the world. In the first Renaissance, they talk about cosmopoiesis, and that means literally world creation. They started to think anew. They started to come together from all areas of society. They started to discuss. They created future scenarios through their creative imagination, through the arts. The arts were the tool they used in order to come up with future scenarios, and then the politicians and the decision makers, they took these future scenarios and said, okay, this sounds logical, but what do we do with it? How can we implement it in the practical life? I think this is so important that we do understand that don't be afraid of your shadow. But what happens is, because we are so tuned into the negative, then we defend ourselves. And when we start to open up, I had a wonderful conversation with a young woman here after this house, and I've moved into a collective in Lisbon now. And then we talked about that, and she said, I'm open, but she, at the same time, we are reserved for the love, to open, because we are hurt. Why? Because we are together with people who still have the majority of their emphasis on the negative, not the positive. So when we start to open and investigate our shadow, then we are damned for that. We are condemned for it, judged for it. And of course, then we defend ourselves. And then we create the separation, the gaps between us, both on the individual level and also on a global level. And that is the start of the war. We feel that we have to defend ourselves. And then we go to war in order to protect our privileges.
Knut, do you remember when we started this program we started talking about thoughts and how our thoughts created the world. How do you feel that the program has grown? Are we going in the right direction?
I wanted to comment on that, Carla, because I think this is so important, and this is given because I had a talk with a French woman now before for MindPlore, and she was, very pessimistic. And so, will most of the people go back again after the pandemic? Will they go back to the old normal? We discussed this new and old standard or normal. And I said, yes, I believe that we need to look beyond the collapse, beyond the negative, and to focus on what is coming after the collapse. And that is, payoff, in my own work. But then to understand that there is something very positive going on. And when I have had some amazing, as I say, I'm so surprised with these young people on the house, and just coming, by accident into some conversation. And when I talk about this, what is about to happen and so on, and how we can create a new world, and so that totally wide open. And as I said, so this for me gives hope. But because we are bombarded with negative news through the media and telling whatsoever, then we cultivate the negative. And because we also now talk about energy, and oh no, again, I use the same arguments, sorry. But in the first Renaissance, that was a rise of the consciousness. The next global Renaissance is the rise of energy, emotions, how we relate to each other on an energetic level. So we need to understand that the energy, the moving force here isn't the emotional stuff. The thinking is the direction. The thinking gives us the direction, But it can also, because we are conditioned, then when we have some certain feelings, I'm not worth enough, as Carla mentioned. I'm not worth enough. And I have been through that, because you were never good enough. You didn't live up to your father's expectations, okay. And then you have to fight that in some way. Otherwise you don't survive. But as I say again, there is a shift now. And I am optimistic because for me, this is an evolutionary impulse. It's an evolutionary movement. Whatsoever people think or react now, this will happen whatsoever. We are in the midst of that shift.
Mary Alice, what do you think? I know you weren't here in the beginning, but do you see that all of our lives are controlled by how we think? And if we can change our thinking, we could change the world. And just like that, it's like we hold a magic wand, and that wand just needs to be waved and brought to the world.
I think so too. So I've been sitting on that cusp of, have we learned anything? Like nature said to us, go home, go to your room. Go to your room, you know what you did. And think about what you did, right? Have we learned anything? Have we been reflective, or have we been busy scrambling, trying to go back to wherever we were before? And there is something in human nature that wants it to be easy. I want to go back to what I already knew. Even if it wasn't comfortable, at least I knew it. And, there's something in storytelling. We don't remember those kind of stories where it was all beautiful, everything was perfect. We remember stories where it wasn't business as usual. Those are the ones that stick with us. So we're also programmed to do that because that's the way we learn fastest. So these things are there. And our stories make a map of the world. So like you said, Knut, we piece our stories together, they make the map. So a new piece comes flying in, and if it kind of fits at the edge of where I have been before, I entertain that one. And if it doesn't, I can do one of two things. Either I'm totally blind to it, like it flies by me and I just don't even know it was there, or I defend myself from it. No, that can't be the truth. So I've had people tell me the worst thing in my life was when I was telling somebody my story and they told me that never happened. And there's something incredibly painful when you get that. But I also am optimistic because I think we have gone past a point of evolution. I think there are so many young people who have a burning fire in them for something new, and because of two experiences. And one of those happened to me when I was 25. I was in New Zealand, and it was the first year I was in New Zealand, and Buckminster Fuller's World Game came through the Rotary Club, and I played the World Game. Now, if anybody has ever played the World Game, or if they haven't, it's played on a satellite map of the planet. So not this map we're used to looking at, which is very America's Eurocentric and has no idea of the size of anything, but an actual satellite map. So you're playing on the dimensions of the Earth. Everybody who's playing the game is part of humanity, and humanity comes onto the map as in the way that it grew. So you can see how many millions of people there are in the world, or billions of people, where they are in the planet, and where the younger and olders are. So you can see the population distribution physically by people standing on the map. And then there are other people in the room who are playing the World Bank and all the other world organizations. And there's a group of people who are, their job is to be the world media. And every hour they report on, in order to make budget, Egypt has sold all the pyramids to, so essentially, if you're in a country, you get given the portfolio at that moment in time of what's actually happening in the country. And they say, go, here's how much in debt you are, Germany. Here's how much in debt you are, so-and-so. Here's where you don't do your, so the whole game, when you play it, shows you quite graphically that there is enough in the planet for everyone. That actually, and they called everybody who's playing the game around the map, okay, you can see that this is how much we spend on armaments. This is how much it would cost to eliminate world hunger. What should we do? And we all looked at each other and we said to each other, we should share. That's what we should do. So that's one moment in my life. The second moment was falling in love with the story of Denmark going bankrupt in 1813. In 1813, Denmark was on the wrong side of the Napoleonic Wars. The UK came and tried their latest technology, which was firebombing. They burnt the ships, stole the rest of them, and Denmark was suddenly from a big power to a small country as it is today. So nobody had any money to do anything, so they talked to each other. And 50 years later, not only did they have universal education, the first in the world for both boys and girls, because the king said, we might be poor, but we don't have to be stupid as well. But they also had the golden age. This was the time of Hans Christian Andersen, Søren Kierkegaard, all of the famous poets and things, because they had to focus on each other, because they stayed in conversation. The Renaissance for Denmark happened at that time. And most people study the golden age, but they don't study what led up to the golden age, which was losing everything. And that's an interesting moment in our current history. So there's number 2 point of, what happens when you know that the world has enough for everybody if we would share. And number 2, that when you have nothing, you sometimes can band together and find everything. So these 2 points, intersecting into that story of what do we choose to do now and what story are we entertaining. And there's a website called stories.life, which is a group of sustainability organizations who want to put the spotlight on the story of economics we're living in. And they say we've chosen right at the moment to live in the horror story. We've made Earth the servant and the slave, and therefore people can be servants and slaves too. But shouldn't we choose to live in a love story instead? A categorical choice of moving from the horror story to the love story and being part of something and closely connected to something and pouring love on something could change everything. And that everything could change in a moment. So I think you're right. It depends on what we choose to see and what we choose to think about who we are in relation to anything else.
You just gave me an idea for another show. The games we play and why we play them as we do. Because that's what all this is about. It's the stories we tell ourselves. If we tell ourselves that we don't have money, we're not going to have money. If we tell ourselves we have everything we need, we will have everything we need. And I'm living proof of that one, because even though finances haven't been great, I've always been able to get through and have what I needed when I needed it. So I don't know if you'd be interested in doing this one day, Mary Ellis, but I would love to use that as a topic and bring you in on it. How do you feel?
So I was just giving the thumbs up thumbs up look, but of course you can't see that on audio, so I need to speak the thumbs up at the same time.
Actually, I did see it, and I was really excited. And I learned something new about StreamYard. I know how to now make you guys the star speaker. Canute, do you have something to say?
Yeah, back again, to how we create a world with our thoughts. And when we talk about this inner climate, I think that if you think about the emotions and our feelings, that is the motive power, okay? That is what put our thinking into action. So to create a new world, we need to also to transform our feelings, and that we can do with our thinking, because we start to think anew. I don't know, on a practical level, I really see that very often, that I have this big vision, and then sometimes, of course, I start, not to doubt it, but it feels so overwhelming. So I have this inner dialogue between this and that. And then I do understand it. Okay, if I want to follow my vision, what I've been told, what I really believe in, I have to change my feelings about that thinking, that better thinking, both for me and for other people as well. So when I transform my feelings with my new thinking, and of course, then I need to be open for new thoughts and thinking, and that new story, because that's the storytelling. We change our storytelling, or stories about ourselves, about the cosmos, about the universal, global, other people, whatsoever it is. We change our story. And when we change the story, we change our perception of it. And when we change our perception, we change the energy we put into that kind of thinking. So when we have a certain feeling of unworthiness, then we say, yeah, but I am worthy. And then we start to think, okay, how do I change that? Because yes, I know that I am worthy. This is an illusion that I'm not worthy, this unworthiness. And then we start to experience, because for me this is extremely important, that in order to really to change, we need new experiences, we need good experiences. That is the healing power. I tell you, that you are okay. And then you start, when I have told you 100,000 times, you may need that, So I repeat it and repeat until, okay, maybe it is true what you say, tell me that I am okay. And then we start to open up, and then we build down the negative feelings and build up the positive feelings, and that has an enormous effect also on the environment, and then we start to create a new world.
Just one thing I wanted to say to that. I've been listening to Marissa Peer, who is a hypnotherapist and a very well-known one, who says that somebody else can tell you a million times something, but your own voice is the most powerful movement on your system. So if you stand in the mirror and look at yourself and actually go, I love you, and you get more specific about it, and even if it feels really silly, you keep doing it, you actually will get better leverage on yourself than listening to anybody else, because your system is waiting for your own voice to tell you, you're okay, you matter, I'm going to take care of you, and you're worthy, and all that kind of stuff. And I think back to the definition Nathaniel Branden gave in the 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem. He's often noted as the grandfather of the self-esteem definition, but he says there's 2 components to that. Number 1, knowing that you have the capacity to do something, you actually are capable of doing something. And number 2, that you are worthy to be here and to have life. And these 2 things need to ride together in order for self-esteem to be high. And often when people are saying, I think to myself anyway, when people say his ego is too big, I actually think, no, it's too small. Because if your ego was robust enough, you wouldn't have to tear down other people. You would be curious about them. And so for me, the two things of gratitude, which has been scientifically proven to strengthen your system and be a foundation for stuff, and curiosity, which means fear has to go stand in the corner because curiosity is going to take over the room. And curiosity gets you out of the corner and gets you to the center of the room, able to move in any direction. So that question of in my thoughts about how can I believe that life is happening for me and not to me, have that attitude of gratitude. And secondly, how can I be more curious? Because that's going to help me in expanding my thoughts, in looking for more positive and potent thoughts, and in being open to those things that can help and uplift me. And often I've noticed in my life, they were there, but because I was looking the other direction, I didn't see them if I was looking down. So I practice when I'm walking along. I notice most people focus right in front of themselves, and especially if they're in an urban environment, they'll be focusing on what I would call shop window level. So they're looking in the shop windows and they're looking at the ground. They never look up. They never look around. So in fact, their picture and our whole frame has become the shape of a computer screen right now. But the interesting things, the most interesting thoughts are at the periphery. That's where the new stuff is happening. And that's what our system, our eyes are actually set up to notice movement in the peripheral vision. But the more we stare into the screen, the more our vision is narrowed. So that could be an interesting thought. How do I expand my vision and see the possibilities that are waiting and hiding in plain sight?
And such wonderful insight. I want to thank you guys because we really have come to the end. But dreams or our thoughts, be aware of what you're thinking, people out there, and also me and Canute and Mary Ellis, because our thoughts are what shape the world. If we want a peaceful world around us, it comes starting inside. If we want to do something and no one has ever done it and we want to do it, it's right in our mind. Make it happen. And with that, I want to thank Canute, Mary Ellis, Ozma for helping me get on air because I lost track of StreamYard and she got us back here. Thank you all for helping us. Thank you all for watching. And I will be back on Thursday with another MindPlore talking about what our thoughts can do for us. And with that, let's all wave goodbye. Bye-bye, everyone. Canute, aren't you going to wave goodbye? Okay.